Welcome to episode 2 of Sweat Society by Fuel Lab. Today we are talking carbs,
Carbohydrates.
carbohydrates. So, this is one of the most confusing and honestly the most argued about topic in sports nutrition, fueling. So, there's a lot of noise out there, and we want to break it down a bit. Everyone seems to have an opinion, but the science is actually clear. So we're going to strip it back to basics, what athletes really need in training and racing, what's myth, and what actually works.
Cool. Should we dive in?
Let's dive in.
Okay, great. Yeah, so carbs. Let's first look at the energy systems in the body. We have two. We have the aerobic and the anaerobic systems. So if you are exercising or training at a lower heart rate, your body has access to oxygen, and we call that the aerobic system. Is then your body's using the aerobic system, meaning that you are actually oxidizing more fat, and that's your fat burning zone. So you always hear people that want to lose weight, they say you need to exercise at a low heart rate, and that's mainly because your body is then still using a little bit of carbs, but mostly relying on fat as its energy source there, because there is more time to actually convert that fat into energy.
Okay.
Yes, and whereas if you are moving up a notch and you're increasing your heart rate, your body is then moving to an anaerobic state where it then mainly only uses carbohydrates for energy. And that is where you are pushing a little bit harder. That's maybe when you are also exercising for a longer period of time. It is also when you may be doing intervals and that type of thing. So there's definitely two systems at play. But when it comes to racing or when you're doing an event, you probably are going to lean more towards the anaerobic side because you're going to push a little bit harder than just going for a easy zone 2 stroll, for example. And that is then where your body is going to use a lot more carbohydrates in that system.
Okay, great. So what are the types of carbohydrates that you get?
So you get a lot of different types of carbohydrates. So we spoke about carbohydrates as food in the previous episode. So definitely go listen to that if you haven't done so already. There we break it down a little bit more in detail. So for the purpose of this one, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the types of carbs, but let's call it sugars that you find typically in your energy or your carbohydrate drink mixes and gels, because that gets quite confusing. It also, leans towards the question, but can't I just eat a potato or an orange or drink Coke or whatever on a race? And that is, what we need to think about a little bit more in detail, because it does have an effect. So carbohydrates, typically, we want to eventually move to a point where the body is using glucose, because glucose is, of course, the preferred fuel source. And so we get different types. We get sucrose. Sucrose, we all know, is table sugar, and that is basically a mixture of glucose and fructose. Lactose, for example, that we find in milk is glucose and galactose together. Then we get maltose, which is glucose plus glucose, and then we get maltodextrins, which is 3 plus glucose molecules that are actually tied together. So it really just comes down to the molecular connections in terms of glucose or fructose or bonds that then form these different types of sugars. So we see that different gels on the market and different carbohydrate mixes use different formulations of these sugars for whatever purpose they want it to use. So some of them are a little bit cheaper. Others might be a bit more expensive. Some are for quick energy release, and others release the energy a little bit slower. So it really depends on your goal and also your budget and how these companies decide to formulate their products.
Okay, so if we just go back one step, if you look at sport types and the duration of exercises, the topic that we're covering with the gels and the carb drink specifically would be for someone that's going to do more endurance type sport. So and longer. So you're not necessarily going to use a gel when you're going to go for your 1K stroll around the block.
No, I don't think so.
So can you just give our listeners like a basic idea of when would you look at, maybe using a gel or a carb drink, which types of sport are they used in?
Yeah, great question. So If we look at the body, we see that generally if you are well fed, so in other words, you weren't fasting or you weren't starving yourself, and you are well fed, your body can have a reserve of about 90 minutes worth of glucose. So that's a mixture of circulating glucose and then glucose stored as glycogen in your liver and in your muscles. So if you are going to do anything for longer than 90 minutes, then you're going to, of course, need a form of carbohydrates. However, if you are, once the gun goes off and you are basically sprinting, you are going to burn through that, reserve, that 90-minute reserve quicker, and you might need a carbohydrate a little bit sooner. So even like, for example, you mentioned endurance sport. Yes, it's definitely more for endurance, but even like, for example, in high rocks, that is not necessarily 90 minutes, it's shorter, but the intensity is so high. You can just imagine if you are driving your car and you put petrol in it and you're driving on eco mode, you're going to get further with less fuel. Yes. But if you're going to go into sport mode and you're just going to, flat box it, you're going to burn through a lot more fuel quicker. And it's basically the same with your body. So it really depends on what you are going to do. And it comes back to that, the energy systems that I spoke about earlier. But generally, 90 minutes is kind of, your sweet spot. Except if you've started your training with no food at all, then you're probably going to have to start with something already. And it also then, of course, depends on the intensity of the session. One of the main things that I see is a problem, especially in women, is underfueling, especially if you're maybe trying to lose weight. In endurance athletes like cyclists and runners, triathletes often want to be as light as possible because it makes sense. You'll be quicker and you won't be as heavy going up and uphill and so forth. But there's a really fine line between underfueling and not feeling effectively for your performance. So it's something you need to be careful of, bear in mind.
So if you do look at you maybe training for 90 minutes plus, and that there's a certain amount of time that you're going to be busy, or you are going to you have a race that's coming up, where would you start with the amount of carbs that you're going to take during that time?
So it really depends on person to person. But when we look at the research studies, so how they kind of got to these numbers is it's a very interesting test. It's like they're looking at the fuel or the fuel usage in the body, but basically the gas exchange happening. So there's a mask on your face and it's measuring the oxygen and carbon dioxide being used up. So that kind of shows you when are you going to move from your aerobic to your anaerobic phase. And it's different for everyone. So some people, depends on your VO2 max and how fit you are and all of those things, it actually differs. But basically we see that the sweet spot is around 30 to 90 grams of carbs per hour, where you'll probably lean more towards the 90 grams for the longer sessions. And especially if you're someone that's maybe a bigger built, or maybe a man, or someone that, you feel like you use a lot more carbs, you'll maybe lean more towards the upper end. If you are a petite person and for whatever case, maybe you don't want to have as much carbs, you might lean towards the low end. But it's a range. It's quite a big range. And I would say 30 is quite low. That's like the minimum. And I would generally suggest more than that, maybe leaning more towards 40 to 60 grams for most people. And then up to 90 grams. In some cases, people even go up to 120 grams per hour or more. But that is a place where you've definitely had to, in general, you need to train your carbs in your training as well, or your gut. But especially when you're going towards the upper limit of 100 or 120 grams per hour, you definitely need to have trained your body to be able to oxidize that amount of glucose. And that's also where the different types of carbs, glucose and fructose and so forth, also come into play.
So you're not going to start off with 120 grams an hour?
No, I would not recommend. No, I would definitely not recommend that. Work yourself up, and it's trial and error. If you maybe start with 40 grams, see how you feel, and then move it up to 60 and see how you feel. Maybe you feel a difference. Generally speaking, if you can tolerate more carbohydrates, you'll do better because there's more fuel available and you won't ever have to tap into that excess or that reserves. And that takes a little bit more longer for your body to actually use that as that energy boost that you need now. So you might get that bit of a dip and then you'll feel a little bit better. But if there's always enough glucose circulating in your blood, you'll feel great throughout your whole race. So more is definitely better, but within limits. So, and you need to have trained your gut.
And the common gels that we see on the market, what is the carb ratio or the carb weight per gel that you usually find?
So the grams per
Yeah.
gel. Yo, it's different, hey, because there's so many different brands on there. But generally, your normal average size gel typically contains around 20 to 30 grams of carbs in a gel. You nowadays get gels that have 40 grams. Some even go up to 60 grams, but then they are quite big gels, and they are a lot more dense. So it's again something you need to taste and see if you enjoy it and see if you can stomach it. And in terms of the ratio, that's you mentioned it quickly, is we see that there's a lot of these products have different sources of carbohydrates, so glucose and fructose or maltodextrins and those types of things. And that's mainly because we prefer to get multi-transportable carbohydrates in when we're training, because if you're just going to rely on glucose, you're going to run into some trouble. Because we actually see with research that the upper limit of glucose oxidation in the body is about 60 grams per hour. So if you are going to consume more than 60 grams of glucose, then you are going to run into some trouble, mainly because there's the transporter or the receptor on the cells is going to you're going to run into trouble because it's going to kind of cause a bottleneck. The glucose isn't going to be able to move out of the intestines quick enough into the cells, which then might lead to water being drawn into the intestines, and then you're going to get the runny tummy and the stomach cramps and all of that we don't want. So we do see brands bringing in a mixture of maybe 2-to-1 ratio, where there's 2 times glucose to 1 times fructose, because fructose gets absorbed in a different way. However, fructose then, goes through the liver to replenish the glycogen stores. So it kind of moves that way around, but it's more of a slower release energy, if you can understand that, because it's kind of first going to glycogen and then going back to glucose. So there's a ratio, but nowadays we do see, especially for people that want to go up towards 120 grams per hour, because if you're doing a 2-to-1 ratio where there's 2 times glucose to 1 times fructose, you can go up to 90 grams per hour of carb oxidation without stomach discomfort. But then if you want to go up to 120, we do see that the 1-to-1 ratio actually, or 1 to 0.8 ratio actually works a little bit better. So then you're having a little bit more fructose, but then it's just to kind of, again, get rid of that bottleneck effect, and so that the stomach and the intestines don't get upset with the amount of glucose and so forth in the body. But you have to train that, like, especially with 120 grams an hour. It's something that you've needed to train for consistently for a while.
So basically the different, so say the glucose and the fructose gets transported differently in the body. The transportation to use the energy, or to create the energy.
Exactly.
And that's why there's a difference in the two.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you're going to use a fuel source with only one, you can only go up to a certain point.
Exactly.
And then the body can't absorb anymore.
Exactly.
Or use the fuel. And then if you use a different kind, it's still a carb, but it's a different type of carb. The body uses a different way to transport it to create the fuel. And that's why you can use more.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So if you have a someone that's, say, training for a half marathon, they know they're going to be busy for about 2.5 hours. So now they start working out these ratios and the amount of carbs that they need to consume. And you say, minimum is about 30 grams, and they say, okay, let's start with 30 grams an hour. Then typically during a race they would take 2 to 3 gels.
Yes.
Okay.
Around, it depends on what gel they use, but generally it will be at least 1 gel an hour, and then maybe they'll grab a Coke at one of the aid stations or a banana or something, just to top up that deficit of about 10 grams. Or they can go up to 2 gels per hour, and then it's more or less 40 grams, again depending on the gel.
On the gel.
But then it'll typically be, if it's 2.5 hours, it'll be between 2 and 3 gels.
Okay. And then if you've used that and you say, okay, let's up it a bit more, my tummy is coping and I'm doing okay, but I want to see that I can get a little bit more carbs in, and you say up to 90 grams.
Yeah.
How many, and you have to work out the amount of carbs in the gel, and you might take 2 gels an hour.
Yes.
How do you split it then in that time?
So yeah, ideally it's better to split it than to gobble down 2 gels or 3 gels after each other. So maybe let's say you're going to take 2 gels an hour, maybe take one every half an hour. Or if you're going to take three every 20 minutes, try to take the gel. And the main reason for that is you never really want a lot of anything in the stomach at once. So you kind of just want to give that consistent feed throughout an hour or throughout the race instead of just gulping down a lot at once. If you, especially if you drink too much, if you take too much at once, it might lead to a stitch. A lot of people feel that, or you feel that sloshing feeling in your stomach, which is also not comfortable. And the other thing is, if you are going to push it, maybe for the last stretch, or you going up a hill, or whatever the case may be, or the heat is like really intense and your heart rate is going up, what happens is your body kind of goes into a stress response. It releases adrenaline, which is completely normal. But then what happens is a lot of the blood flow moves away from the stomach towards your brain and your limbs to kind of get you through whatever you need, because basically your brain's thinking that you are being chased by a lion. It's not necessarily understanding that you're doing this by choice. So it's kind of just like survival. We need to get out here. And what happens is when that blood moves away from your stomach and there's a lot of stuff in your stomach, then that poses a problem, because your stomach is then going to try, or your gut's basically going to try and get anything and everything out. And that's when we start to see where people visit the porta potty a bit more often than they should, or they feel really uncomfortable, stomach cramps, and their performance decreases, because what happens is you then don't feel well, so you end up not taking any gels or any nutrition anymore, and then you just bonk.
Yeah, you run out of fuel.
Exactly.
Okay, and why would you rather take a gel or maybe a carb drink and not just eat a bar one and drink a can of Coke?
That's a very good question. So the Coke is still a good option. I mean, you'll still see it at most races as being one of a nice source of carb, mainly because it has glucose and it has fructose and it has caffeine. So it kind of ticks a lot of boxes. A lot of people like the taste, and it's easy to drink. However, if you're gonna just drink Coke, you're also going to run into a bit of trouble, because you're going to have to drink a lot of Coke to get the same amount of carbs, and then you're going to get that sloshing feeling and you're just not going to feel well. And then the caffeine content's also just going to be too high, because that's something you need to also plan. We'll talk about that in another episode. And then so Coke, there is a space for Coke, but it has to be in combination with the other products. And then a bar one. So let's say you take a 90-gram bar one. It's quite a big bar. So firstly, you have to carry that. And secondly, you have to eat it while you are running or whatever you're doing. And in that bar is about 60 grams of carbs. So that would be technically quite a good option for in an hour. I mean, it's tasty, it's cheap, and that type of thing. And it does have a combination of carbs, because it contains glucose, it contains lactose from the chocolate, it contains sucrose. So there's fructose and all of those things in it. So it is a multi-transportable carb. But the problem with a bar one, and if you just have one, it might not be a problem, but the main issue there is with the bar one comes quite a lot of fat. So inherently there's a lot of fat in bar one, just the way that it's made and so forth. And we see that fat and also protein to a degree decreases the stomach or gastric emptying. And again, going back to that point of you never actually want too much to stick around in your tummy for too long. If you're going to have a bar one every hour, you're also going to run into a bit of trouble, because your body's going to have to digest that, try and get rid of it. If your heart rate's going to spike, then again, you're going to start to feel a bit of that, gastric discomfort. So it's kind of, you can maybe incorporate it, have a bar one, but you're still going to have to rely on maybe a carb drink or gel to make sure you're getting enough carbs without, the gastric discomfort.
Okay. And if we look at carb drinks and gels, what is the big difference between the two? Is it just the way that you consume it, or is there any difference in the way that it, that the body uses it for the fuel?
No, it's very similar. It just basically comes down to the formulation. So the gels, of course, are more concentrated, so that's why their consistency is a lot thicker, and that's for a lot of people a lot easier to run with, for example. So running with a bottle of carb drink might not be as comfortable, except if you're doing trail running and you have it in your back. Or again, maybe you don't feel comfortable with a lot of fluid in your stomach, then a gel works a little bit better, but you're still going to have to consume fluid because you're dehydrating during that time. So a combination of the two is actually your best bet, because with the gels or with the chews, for example, then at least with chews, at least you get to chew something.
Yes.
So it's a bit of difference, in texture. But you know that you are nailing your carb intake with the quantity there, but then at least with a carb drink, often they're also mixed with electrolytes. So that again helps with the dehydration and making sure you are consuming enough fluid. So kind of having the combination of the two, again, depends on how long you're going to be busy and what you're going to do.
What type of activity?
What type, yes, especially if you're doing high rocks, having like a carb drink and doing burpee broad jumps is going to be quite uncomfortable if you're having like a lot of fluid in your tummy.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you're going to do like a very long endurance type sport, like say a full Ironman or running the Comrades, then obviously just taking gels the whole day is not I won't say ideal, but it's not fun.
No, you're going to get tired of it.
Just
definitely.
to take in the same thing the whole time. So any tips of taking in different types of carbs during that, if you're going to be busy on the road, whether you're doing Ironman or, running for 10, 11 hours?
Yeah, definitely. So in most cases with the longer endurance ultras or Ironman or whatever the case may be, your heart rate is going to be lower. You're not going to be able to maintain a high heart rate, an anaerobic, heart rate for 12 hours. You are going to have to slow down. So generally you would be better off maybe incorporating some food sources as well, because you will be able to stomach it a little bit better, mainly going back to that whole blood perfusion story that I said already. So incorporating something to eat is definitely nice, like mentally, just for some change, because you do get tired of the gels and the carb drinks. It also then provides it a little bit of protein, which is also nice in those types of events, because you are going to break down some muscle in those long distance things. And then also because you are training at a lower heart rate and, you have a little bit more time on your hands because you're busy for 12 hours, you can also get by using things like a potato or a sandwich that is a little bit lower GI, meaning that it releases its sugar a little bit slower. Because if you're having a combination of maybe the gels and some like potatoes and that type of thing, the potatoes may take a little bit longer to digest, but it kind of balances out, if that makes sense, because you do have more time to digest it and to use it. Whereas something in a shorter distance, if you have a potato now, it's maybe only going to release its fuel after you're done. So you kind of wasted it, except if you enjoyed the taste and you felt like you wanted it. And salt's sometimes nice because they add quite a lot of salt on the potato, then yes. But it should just mainly be something then for taste. It's not going to really benefit you in that specific race. Whereas if it's a longer distance thing, then yes, bringing in some variety is definitely key.
Okay, great. And if you do go to the shop and you're not going to necessarily look at our wonderful website with all the different types of gels on it, what would you look at, and what's important to look at when you're buying these kind of gels or chews or carb drinks?
So I would say the most important thing is, of course, to look at the amount of carbs per gel, like per the serving, so that you get, it depends on what you're also going to do. Like if you're going to do a trail run again, you have a bit more space. If you're going to do a road run and you don't enjoy running with a running vest, then looking for something that is a little bit more compact might be better for you. If you are going to cycle, then at least you have some space for bottles. So it's just, you really need to think practically about yourself. Like, what are you going to be able to use? Because it doesn't help you buy 6 gels and you only take one because it was annoying for you to carry it, or you just didn't like the taste, or the texture wasn't working for you. So it is a bit of trial and error. You need to really focus on that. So maybe look at the amount of carbs. Look at the carbs that they're using. What is in it? Is it maltodextrin? Is it fructose? Try and see if they maybe say a little bit about the ratio that they used, and kind of decide what's important for you. Are you going to go up to 120 grams, or are you just going to stick to 30 grams? What are you going to do? And then, of course, maybe it's definitely come down to your taste. Like, what flavors do you enjoy? Do you want something with caffeine? Do you want something with electrolytes? Or are you just fine with just the sugar or just the carbs? So really, you need to kind of bear all of that in mind. And like I said, we will be doing a whole episode on the caffeine, but it is really important to not just have caffeine gels. Like there is a limit. You don't want to overdo it, definitely. So having a variety is also maybe a good option. And the most important thing I would say, if it's the only thing you take away from today, is to train with your carbs. Like, don't ever do anything new on race day. That's such a, like, everyone says it, but it still happens. Like, I mean, I sometimes do it, and then I'm very angry at myself afterwards. But it's really something to bear in mind, is to really just use a few training sessions to see if this works for you. Do you stomach it? Is it practical to open? Like, all of those things, because all of these gels are formulated differently, taste differently, textures are different. So it really, and what works for you doesn't necessarily work for me. So luckily there's so many different amazing brands out there.
So some people train without eating, so that they say they train their body to use fat instead of carbs. Is that a viable thing to do?
Yeah, so training fasted, and it comes down back to the energy systems you use, the anaerobic and the aerobic that I've mentioned, and everyone's different. But basically, training fasted means that you are forcing your body to not use glucose because there isn't any present, and to be more fat adapted. So you are able to use fat more effectively and efficiently without it impairing your performance. So that is the ideal situation where we use fat as our fuel source, because it has more calories and we have fat that we store a lot more effectively than glycogen or glucose, for example. And we do see there's a lot of research studies going about saying, okay, we can definitely train our bodies to be a little bit more fat adapted. So yes, there is definitely a yes and a no to the answer. So generally, we don't want to do every session fasted, because you might not be able to get through the session as effectively as you could have. It's going to definitely impair your sessions if you do it with the wrong session. So if you are going to train fasted because you want to be fat adapted, I would say no more than twice a week, and only with your shorter and more lower intensity sessions. So anything longer than an hour, I would say no. And anything where your heart rate's going to spike, I would say no. It's not going to get the effect that you want. And then it's also going to depend on person to person. And generally, I would say for women, maybe it's not worth it. So females, so the research is still quite new and it's still coming out. So I wouldn't feel too comfortable to say females should go train fasted. It's more, the research is a little bit more towards the men. And it really is person to person. If you feel like it's making a difference to you, and you still can get through your sessions and you manage it well, then great. But then it's really important to recover optimally after that. And especially if you're going to have another session later on in the day, you need to really focus on getting in enough nutrition after your session. But yeah, so it really is a yes and a no answer. Depends, on person to person. So, but the main reason why people do it is that there's a crossover point where you're moving from your using fat to using carbs. And we basically just want to extend that crossover point as far as possible so that your body uses the fat for longer rather than moving over to carbs. But you would actually do that more effectively if you are just training more effectively in terms of managing your heart rate better, getting fitter, and that type of thing, so that when you're doing high intensity things, you are still able to do it at a lower heart rate. So you will, in any case, be using more fat. So instead of trying to manipulate your diet too much and risking, injury or undernutrition, especially in females.
Is there a reason that they suggest, or that females shouldn't be doing it in comparison to men?
It comes down to quite a very important topic, which is called the relative energy deficiency in females, REDS, or in sport specifically. It happens to males as well, but we do see it a lot in females, mainly because of body image and so forth. And females in general don't enjoy eating such massive amounts of foods, and it might become a problem where your energy needs aren't being met. but your expenditure is like way high. So you start to lose a lot of fat, and then it really starts to impact your bone density. You see it often in irregular menstrual cycles. So if that is something you are seeing as an athlete, it should be a really big red flag that you are underfeeding. So doing exercise sessions fasted, there's always a risk that it kind of pushes you towards that side. So it's really something that you need to be very mindful of. And if you're doing it carefully. But generally, you would still be able to perform exceptionally well without it. So don't know if the risk really is worth it at the end of the day.
Okay, great. Thanks. So that was our episode on carbohydrates, episode 2 of the Sweat Society. Thank you, Melissa.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Suzanne. See you in the next one.
See you in the next one.